Please, can I ask everybody to take their seats? Well, good morning and a very warm welcome to you all. My name is Gillian Jeffrey and I'm the General Manager of Operations at Alzheimer's Australia, Queensland. This morning we officially launched Dementia Awareness Month for the month of September with today's lecture, Global Action Against Dementia. Firstly, I'd like to show my respect and acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, of elders past and present on which this event takes place today. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here today, and in particular those guests who are live streaming this event too, in Townsville. I'd like to acknowledge Ms Victoria Beadle, Alzheimer's Australia Queensland CEO, Mr William Bass, Alzheimer's Australia Queensland Board Chair, and Ms Marion Jeevers, our ex-President of the Board. Now, just some housekeeping. If the fire alarm goes off, please make your way down the escalators. I've always wanted to do this. Out into the front entrance of the courtyard. The toilets are on the ground floor and signed as posted. No, they're downstairs. Please, importantly, put your mobile phones onto silent or flight mode so they're not interrupting the recording. And also, because we are recording today's session, please make sure that you have completed the media consent form that you were given at the registration desk. Our focus for Dementia Awareness Month is to lead the way in making Australia the world's first dementia-friendly nation. What a great cause. Our goal is to encourage Australians to become dementia aware and to have a better understanding of what it is like for a person to live with dementia. We want to help communities to become dementia friendly, where people with dementia feel understood, engaged, included and valued. We want communities across Australia to join us in creating a dementia friendly nation. There are an estimated 342,000 people in Australia living with dementia today. Without a significant medical breakthrough, it's estimated that this will increase to almost 900,000 people by the year 2050. That's only 35 years away. This is an issue that will not go away, and it's something that will impact on the entire community in some form. It is therefore in everybody's interest to work towards Australia becoming the world's first dementia-friendly nation. Almost 2 out of 3 Australians who are over the age of 18 are scared of developing dementia, a fear second only to the fear of developing cancer. People with dementia and their families too often experience stigma and can become socially isolated as friends and relatives avoid them. Social activity and connection is important for all of us in our lives, and people with dementia are no different to that. 70% of people with dementia live in the community, so a dementia-friendly community could and will make a world of difference. We want to reduce the stigma, increase awareness and seek greater empathy within the wider community. This Dementia Awareness Month, we launch It Starts With You campaign. We all have a role to play in helping people with dementia sustain their independence, dignity and sense of purpose in our communities. By making small changes, we can make a big difference. So, become dementia aware. Find out more about dementia, increase your understanding of the condition and its impacts, and help us spread the word. Make dementia a priority and key issues in your community, and help us make Dementia Australia a dementia-friendly nation. Download Our First Steps to a Dementia-Friendly Community booklet to get you started. Download our toolkits designed to inspire communities and businesses to make changes that will impact on the quality of life of people living with dementia. To get you started, just go to dementiafriendly.org.au. Today, it starts with Christine Bryden. When she was just 46, Christine Bryden, a science advisor to the Prime Minister and a single mother of 3 daughters, was diagnosed with younger onset dementia. Doctors told her to get her affairs in order as she would soon be incapable of doing so. In 1999, Christine married Paul Bryden, who's with us here today. A decade ago, Christine addressed the Alzheimer's Australian National Conference in Canberra. Since then, she has been an active advocate for people living with dementia. She speaks at conferences in the media in Australia and around the world. Christine was the first person with dementia to be elected to the board of Alzheimer's Disease International, the world peak body for dementia. In 2014, she was appointed as Queensland's first ambassador for our Dementia Friendly Communities program. Christine has written several books. Who Will I Be When I Die? Dancing with Dementia, Nothing About Us, Without Us, and her latest book, Before I Forget, will be on sale here today and signed by Christine after this lecture. Now aged 66, Christine says she has survived and thrived with dementia for 20 years, slowly declining but adjusting along the way, still working hard to rewire her brain. Please welcome Christine Bryden.
Good morning. Well, welcome to you all, and I want to thank Alzheimer's Australia Queensland for inviting me to introduce Gill's talk this morning, because I'm sure that her lecture will be thought-provoking and rewarding for you all. You'll no doubt find inspiration and information for our own efforts to develop a dementia-friendly nation. For example, let's avoid these stripy carpets which look like steps. And what can we do with all those metal pavement buttons leading me all astray throughout the CBD? They're yellow, they're shiny, sometimes they're silver, and you can't actually stand on them without wobbling. I don't really know what they're for, but I'm sure somebody will tell me. You've heard all about me. You know, I'm Christine. Yep, written these books, and I've got flyers for the 3 Jessica Kingsley books. As a person diagnosed with dementia, I really am very grateful for the work of senior civil servants like Gill. In fact, I am personally sure that a large part of the reason for the UK Prime Minister's leadership of the global action against dementia is founded upon her expertise within Whitehall and the wider public sector. As a former civil servant in our Prime Minister's department, I can tell you this is a considerable achievement. She will have had to offer lots of full and frank advice, I suspect. Importantly, though, she also works closely with people with dementia and their families, listening to us and making sure that our perspectives are very much part of the story, part of the outcomes delivered at government level. So that makes her success all the more authentic and important to us all. Now, I want to give you a short background as to why I should be introducing Gill's lecture, which really you've all come to hear, not me. Well, it's because I've become also a reluctant expert in the lived experience of dementia, and I like this painting called The Scream, and now I can't remember who it's by, but at any rate, I like it. It expresses how I feel sometimes. I was diagnosed by one of the world's foremost specialists with a form of dementia, some mixed form, still no idea. My words and vocabulary are disappearing. As Paul will tell you, my behaviour is certainly no longer calm, cool and collected. And my memory of the very recent past, even a thought that has just come into my mind, does a regular and extremely annoying disappearing act. There is no way I could manage my former position as the Science and Technology Advisor to the Prime Minister, let alone administer that huge cooperative research centres programme. Indeed, there's actually no way I could even manage a day at home without Paul's support and encouragement. I call him my enabler. He keeps me going. Yet here I still am, with a new life in the stumbling and turbulent lane of dementia. I used to say slow lane, but it doesn't feel like that anymore. It's turbulent. I'm examining this life with the interest I once had in science and technology, reflecting on this altered and changing inner life and how it is disconnected with the fast-paced world around me. And I am focusing on doing all I can while I can, trying to speak out for all those who do not have a voice. But as you can see, I have to read what I have written, word for word, so as not to lose the thread of my talk. I want you to try to understand how hard it is to live in this unusual and actually very different world, in which each day brings new challenges and losses, and it's a sort of bumpy up and down ride. Some days are better than others. We do rely on our family and professional caregivers to enable us to function to the best of our ability on this journey from diagnosis to death. We do know what it feels like each day to struggle to cope in your world while we seem to be disappearing into ours. We desperately need you to focus on what we can still do, not what we can no longer do, and then to help us to achieve all that we can. It's now an amazing 20 years since my diagnosis. Originally it was called Alzheimer's, then it was called frontotemporal, now it's called Alzheimer's. I don't know what it is, and they have to cut open and take out a bit of my brain, but I need it. So they can wait till I no longer need it. And it'll go to the Queensland Brain Bank, and they're very interested and they can't wait. They wrote me a letter to say so there you go. Although I'm declining steadily, it is thankfully glacially slow. According to regular high-resolution MRI and cognitive function tests, my brain itself seems to be disappearing at about 4% per year. They do measure it with something or other, I don't know how. But I'm battling it and trying to retain more function than they might expect, they being the neurologist. Perhaps I'm rewiring my brain almost as fast as it's becoming unwired, but it is more and more sort of sticky in there and slower. I've reflected on my life to see whether there could possibly be any reasons for me lasting this long, considering my brain looks as if I ought not to be able to talk or walk, and why I might be a survivor. My memoir, called Before I Forget, I like the title, I had to get it written before I forgot everything, was published by Penguin, I think about a week or so ago, and I write about the delights of my early childhood, the challenges, some horrific ones of my early life, but the ongoing learning of my career and now my ongoing quest for survival. I talk about the ways in which I try so hard to cope each day with increasing cognitive impairment. I've often said use it or lose it, and have spent the years since my diagnosis learning new things. At the moment it's Twitter. You'll get odd tweets when I don't really understand what I'm doing, but there you go. Facebook, yes. LinkedIn, yet another new thing, but there we go. And then undertaking meaningful activity like writing this talk, and keeping healthy and eating well, exercising, all of those sorts of things. I'm trying to remember what on earth those 5 healthy things are. I always lose 1 or 2. I could start counting, but there are 5 tips for a healthy brain. Follow them all, whatever they are. They're on the Alzheimer's Australia website. I write in my book as well about future-proofing our children, protecting them against future dementia. I think my mum did a great deal to help me cope. I believe that those activities she did with me, and then my education and career of constant learning and challenge, as well as my positive outlook on life, usually most days, I'm not positive every day, have laid a good foundation for coping with the daily challenge of losing brain cells. But it was all so very, very hard for me in the beginning. As you heard, I was 46 years old. So I want to talk a bit about how that feels, because that's younger onset dementia. I was recently divorced, living in a rental place in Canberra while the divorce was getting sorted out. Life at work was frenetic, challenging, demanding, exhausting, and yet exciting. But I was getting thundering migraines that lasted all week, and I'd get lost in the middle of sentences, not remember names properly, and just put it all down to overwhelming stress. I was not coping at all well, but trying to cover it up and making sure nobody noticed what a turmoil my life had become. My eldest girl was 19. She'd just done a year of university nearby, but had recently left home to go to her preferred course in Sydney. My 14-year-old daughter was starting in high school, beginning to adjust, making new friends and settling in. And my youngest was only 9, still at primary school, having had to change schools because of the divorce, because we'd moved, and was finding it really hard to make friends. So things at home and at work were really challenging, and I was finding life more and more difficult. Then the divorce was finalised, and I managed to find a nice little townhouse for us. And I signed a rather large mortgage. And over one weekend, we all moved in a bustle of boxes and excitement. But then, on the Monday, I went to see the neurologist about some scans I'd had for the migraines. It was the train crash, the day of diagnosis. I felt horror, shock, disbelief, and fear. He told me I had about 8 years until I died, and that I had to stop work immediately and get my affairs in order. Younger onset dementia is a horrific drama of mortgage, children, work, so very different to a diagnosis after retirement. Dementia is a feared and unbelievable diagnosis at any age, let alone at 46. Naturally, I think, I spiralled into despair, as back then there was no support, either for me or for my girls, only for older carers. It was this that first drove me to start my campaign for change. I have now been an advocate for people with dementia for 20 years. At the beginning, I had to challenge the view of the International Alzheimer's Association that we were all mindless, empty shells with no insight. They actually used those words in their annual report. I can see why. It helps raise money, but it doesn't help us cope with this diagnosis. Because we were mindless, empty shells, we could be and were excluded from all activities, all discussion of dementia, all events such as this. There were only a couple of boxes to tick if you went to a conference, professional or carer. That's it. I said, well, where do I tick? Well, you can't. You shouldn't be here. And I was told, even more shockingly, I could not possibly have dementia because I could speak, and therefore that I was not a credible representative. I was faking this diagnosis somehow. But why on earth would I pretend to have what was then, and still is now, such a shameful and feared condition? The only thing I'm faking today is being normal, and that is unbelievably hard work. As you heard, I've spoken nationally and internationally to Alzheimer's associations in all sorts of places, arguing for our inclusion and our support. Spoken to care workers, families, people with dementia, clinicians, other specialists, churches, and young people about what it might feel like if your mum was diagnosed, let alone your grandma. So by the end of last year, I had a big collection of talks just sitting there on the computer. They actually disappeared recently. They just all floated off into the ether from Dropbox. I've tried not to panic, but at any rate, Paul said he did not want to wait until I died to select some key talks from this collection. So now, while I'm still very much alive, Jessica Kingsley Publishers London is releasing my book, Nothing About Us Without Us on World Alzheimer's Day, 21st of September. It's a key selection of my talks to Alzheimer's associations, including launching Alzheimer's Australia Queensland, the very first talk I gave to Alzheimer's Disease International, challenging their stupid attitudes. I didn't say that at the time. I've always thought it's best to, sugar rather than vinegar, or honey rather than vinegar, to change life. But I am so thankful that attitudes are changing and that Alzheimer's Australia has support systems in place. In some of my talks, I refer to stigma. And in 2011, a talk I gave to Alzheimer's Disease International, I referred to the remarkable success in Japan in working towards dementia-friendly communities. And I am delighted, thrilled now to see the leadership of the UK, because we don't often look to Japan because we can't relate easily to the language and the culture and what everybody's doing, but we can certainly follow what the UK is doing. This will see real progress towards changing community attitudes towards people with dementia, and to me that's the key. Never underestimate the negative impact of stigma. It's debilitating and embarrassing to have a condition that is feared and not understood by all those around you. We desperately need a dementia-friendly nation. When thinking about this goal, we must not let those with younger onset dementia slip between the cracks. You see, we don't look as if we have dementia, but we need as much support as those who are diagnosed at what might be seen as a more respected age, older than 65. I've now hit 66, so I've lasted long enough to fit the model at last. So I'm now no longer, I've got enough wrinkles so that people will presumably help me. I don't know. In Australia, we are going to need signage, help in banks, in shops, all sorts of other things that I'm looking forward to hearing from Gill about. And I'm sure we can learn a great deal about the initiatives in the UK. But let's also think about our geography. Australia is a society very much reliant on the car. So many of us live big distances away from shops and community centres. Sometimes we're reliant on aeroplanes just to get to the nearest shop. There is very little public transport except in the major cities. So let's look at where I live, which is thought to be just northern edge of Brisbane. There is one bus about half an hour's walk away that goes every half hour to the station, not coordinated with the train timetable. And then there's one train every half hour to the city, where Alzheimer's Australia is located. So that's going to take me 2 hours just to get there. And on the way back, and this is why I don't do it, I have to get off that bus and I have to cross a 4-lane highway where cars and heavily laden trucks, because we live near a sand mine, are going at 100 kilometres an hour. And the median strip between those 4 lanes has long snake-infested grass, very un-UK-like, I think. The alternative, of course, is a taxi, but there are very few of those prepared to come out to where we live. It costs about $80 return just to the local station and about $140 into the city, single way, one way. Then let's look at Alzheimer's Australia's Queensland, what it faces, what challenges. Its services, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I've probably got it wrong, 20% of the area of Australia, probably something like that. It's as far from here in Brisbane up to Cairns as it is down to Melbourne, let alone the enormous distances out west on roads. I don't think there's a rail, to isolated places like Cunnamulla, Charleville, Roma, Charters Towers, Winton, you name it. You have to get an aeroplane, little plane, charter a plane to get there. It's a bit like asking a small office in London to service the whole of Europe, reaching Moscow as well as the tip of Scotland. The only thing that would benefit us is we all sort of speak English. So let's listen carefully to Gill and then think creatively. How can we apply those excellent programs in the UK? Certainly we can apply them to our cities, to our regional centres, but what do we do about our geography? I'm sure there is much we can achieve and much we can learn. So how did the UK get the Prime Minister to lead? To me, that was a game changer. I personally believe Gill is the one to ask. She is the Deputy Director of Social Care, Local Government and Partnership, a leadership role within the UK Department of Health. She led the UK Prime Minister's Challenge on Dementia. She probably made it happen. And is now head of the Global Action Against Dementia. Again, she's probably within the team that's making that happen. Never underestimate the power of civil servants, as we call them, public servants. Having been one, don't underestimate us. If you watch Utopia or you ever watched Yes Minister, you know what I mean. In this role, she has importantly, though, and this is where I think she stars in my view, she's engaged with the community, including with people with dementia who she personally knows, and she's made many presentations to change the way we think. In fact, Paul reminded me that I'd met Gill last year at a dinner, and then you reminded me it was at lunch as well, when Dr. Dennis Gillings was here, the World Dementia Envoy. And I'm sure she was actually the mover and shaker behind the key meetings that were then held in Canberra with our senior parliamentarians. It is through people such as Gill that real change does take place in our society, with realistic but world-changing goals set and achieved, as well as key people and the community engaged and motivated. Through her presentation, you're going to find out what's happening in the UK, and importantly, what are the key factors that we might use to achieve our own dementia-friendly community. I'm personally keen, and you might not be covering it, but I'm actually keen to hear what we could learn from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I've long said that dementia is a disability, and I don't quite know why we seem to be outside that circle, because there are some really good rights in there, including the right to live in the community, i.e. not in institutional care. Now, you've not come actually this morning to hear me, but to listen to the remarkable progress in the UK and what we can learn from them. What can we take away from Gill's presentation that will help us in our own efforts? What will translate into our own society, our government, and perhaps importantly, our own geography? Think creatively while you listen, and thank you for listening to me this morning.
Morning, everyone. So I'm just going to make sure that my clicker works. Excellent. Okay. So thank you, Christine, for that very passionate and emotional and beautiful introduction. Civil servants, we don't always necessarily get that recognition. And we're called bureaucrats here in Australia, but it's lovely to hear that. So my journey has been since 2009. I started and actually wrote the first National Dementia Strategy, which was the first ever key strategy across Europe. And as a result of that, I think I've seen the journey from 2009 to today. I was also party to the Prime Minister's Challenge, so I've written 2 Prime Minister's Challenges. And then after the G8 summit, which our Prime Minister used his presidency, I was asked to lead on the Global Action Against Dementia. And for me, I think this is, as a civil servant, you tend to move around in your job. This has been my vocation, and I've got a lot of passion for what I do. I've worked with lots of people with dementia and their carers, and their carers are always saying we also need to have that support and that recognition, and I think that is important. I've also worked with lots of health and care professionals, with civil servants and people across the world. So what I'm hoping to do today is to kind of share my views on that global dementia challenge, tell you a bit about the journey so far, and give you some insights into what we've been doing in the UK. I also want to talk about the importance of partnerships. You can't do this on your own. You have to work across a range of partners. And then I want to talk about how we can go further and faster. We mustn't ever be complacent. We've always got to keep striving to go further and faster. And then how can we ensure a sustainable future? I suppose my presentation doesn't also just derive from my experiences as a civil servant. I've got personal experiences. Both of my grandmas had dementia. So Kathy and Esther really impacted on my family. And I think dementia becomes like a team sport because it affects everybody in the family. So before I start, I just wanted to kind of get a sense in the room of how many people know somebody with dementia, have a friend of dementia or a loved one. So it was the same kind of percentage that I saw yesterday. I spoke yesterday in Parliament House in Sydney, and a number of people there said that they had experiences. So what I'm hoping is that some of the things that I talk about, you can see that progress, but also really appreciate the opportunity after my presentation to come up and talk to me and say, well, what about other things? Because as a policy lead and an influencer across senior civil servants and with parliamentarians, I have a role to actually challenge that. And I'm meeting with senior civil servants in Canberra on Monday to do that very same thing. So I'm hoping that I can reflect your wishes back with them when I meet with them. So I really like this cartoon that I found because I think it, for me, reflects what we think, or some people in society think, as we're ageing, that we're becoming more dependent on health and care. But actually, I think ageing is a time to celebrate. I think we should be celebrating it. I'm 48. I don't feel 48. My daughter's with me and my husband's with me currently in Sydney. And she's 15. She's beautiful. She's taller than me. Her hair's down to her bottom. And we're walking along Sydney the other day, and all the young boys are looking at her. And at one point I was thinking, why aren't they looking at me? Because in my head, I'm still 18. And I've got a real quote from the late Terry Pratchett, who I met actually when he was trying to advocate around research. And he said, inside every old person is a young person wondering what happened. And that's how I feel. And that's why I train, that's why I run, and that's why I try and keep healthy, to keep my mind and my body still healthy. So, as I said, the world's population is ageing. Improvements in health and care in the past century have contributed to people living longer and healthier lives, and that should be celebrated. However, this has also resulted in an increase in the number of people with non-communicable diseases, including dementia. The baby boomers are not only contemplating their post-retirement lives, but frequently find themselves having to make difficult choices about care for their ageing parents as well, many of which will have dementia. I mean, I'm lucky that my dad, he is 78, he's as bright as a button, but all the ladies in my family have had dementia. I don't think he will get dementia, but if he does, I want to be thinking about how I care and support him and give him the best life so he can live well with dementia. So if health and care systems fail to adequately meet the needs of people with dementia, then it's letting down a significant proportion of the ageing population. And I don't just mean the traditional services, and I'll talk about what we can do within the communities and what we as citizens can do as well. I think the litmus test of our generation's willingness to face up to the challenge of an ageing population is whether now we take the decisions, now we do the difficult heavy lifting to make sure that by then we are able to look after older people on our planet with dignity and respect. And we're all heading in that way. So we should all be making the best effort. And it's a real incentive for me, because if I am going to get dementia, I'm hoping that the services by then are good enough for me to live well, and that there's potentially a disease-modifying cure out there, which again I'll speak about. So, you may know these figures well, but they have to be repeated because I think their magnitude may well overwhelm society's ability to cope, and that's what we don't want to happen. I think we need to recognise what's happening, but we also need to take from that and lead and make sure that we're making a difference. So globally, and these are the figures from the World Health Organization, in 2015, an estimated 47.7 million people are living with dementia. And this will increase into 2050 by 135.46 million. Here in Australia, as Christine and others have said, there are nearly 343,000 people living with dementia, and that will increase to 400,000 in less than 10 years. In the UK, there are 850,000 people living with dementia. Globally, 63% live in low and middle income countries, and by 2050, that will rise to 71%. There was a recent report done by Martin Prince, and if you want to look it up, I would really recommend it. And it's talking about how, as low to middle income countries are surviving HIV and AIDS, they're ageing, and therefore the demographic time bomb is increasing for them. And Martin Prince used this map of the world, and he showed it, the time zone coming up, and you could see the low to middle income developing countries going into red. So we really do need to, as a society, take responsibility for those countries as well. With these rising millions, the economic impact of dementia is increasing relentlessly. The global cost of dementia in 2002 was $604 billion US, or equivalent of 1% of the global GDP every year. In Australia, the total health and aged care system expenditure was 4.9 billion Australian dollars. And one of the things that we've been doing when we first developed the National Dementia Strategy and the Prime Minister's Challenge was to use those figures to say, this is the cost-benefit analysis. If you invest in the right health and care system, then actually you can reduce some of these costs, because that cost is just increasing. The truth is we need to do more. We need to go far faster if we're able to avert the projected global burden of dementia becoming unsustainable. Can I just ask if colleagues are aware of a lady called Margaret Chan? So Margaret Chan is the Director General for the World Health Organization, and she's a very influential lady. She's about 4'3" and formidable. And I first met her in London at the UK Legacy event, and I was really taken by her passion and her leadership on dementia. And I just wanted to quote what she said at the summit in March 2015. I can think of no other disease that has such a profound effect on loss of function, loss of independence, and the need for care. I can think of no other disease so deeply dreaded by anyone who wants to age gracefully and with dignity. I can think of no other disease that places such a heavy burden on families, communities, and societies. I can think of no other disease where innovation, including breakthrough discoveries to develop a cure, is so badly needed. And I think that really summarises to me what this issue is, this terrible disease, and the impact it has. It's just over a century ago that Dr. Alzheimer first described the distinctive plaques and tangles of the disease that bears his name. Over 100 years on, there's still no means to cure or slow the progression. In 15 years, we just have 4 drugs that have been developed, none of which slows progression. Can I just ask if colleagues have heard about the recent Eli Lilly announcement around their drug? Great. Professor Alistair Burns, who's our national dementia lead in the UK, he explained it to me. So there's a drug it's called Solar. It's called Solenzumab, which I can't say, and that's why I call it Solar. But basically how Alistair describes it is, if you think about our brains, and we have eggs in our brains, and the plaques and tangles are starting to cook those eggs. And as a result, that's what creates the brain to kind of lose and to lose repair. What Solar does, it's like acts as milk, and the milk pours over the eggs and actually dilutes it. So it kind of dilutes what's happening in the brain and it slows down the progression. So, for example, if this drug was to come through, potentially it could give somebody with early stage dementia 2 to 4 years of slowing down the progression of the disease. It's a bit like HIV and AIDS. So how many of us would want to have that? So Christine, you got it when you were 46. If that drug was out there now, we could slow that down so you could live well, live independent with dementia. And like any drugs, they will increase, they will get better and better. And I'm really passionate and enthusiastic that I think we are now in a position where there is a disease-modifying drug. However, the scientists have said there's probably not going to be a cure for a long time. But if we can live and slow down the progression, I think that's enough. The war on cancer, I think, provides a proxy for the challenges and the pathway to conquering a chronic disease. And I think cancer, people describe dementia like cancer in the 70s, where people never spoke about it. So I know GPs who say they don't want to diagnose dementia because what's out there? There's no cure, there's nothing you can do, and therefore what's the point? And that's what they used to say about the big C. My response to that is who are you? You are not God. How do you have the responsibility to not give that diagnosis? How are you not taking responsibility for those families who need to make changes, who need to understand what's happening? For the individual with dementia who wants to make the choices in their lives as the disease takes over, why are you taking away those opportunities for that individual? And I probably was a bit firmer than what I've just said, but I think we do need to really say this is important. Even though there's not a drug, even though there's not a cure, look at Christine. She can still live well with dementia. So why are we preventing people to understand what you can do and how you can support people? Like cancer, dementia presents us with a disorder so complex that we have barely scratched the surface in our efforts to understand its cause, the progression, and the targets for intervention. A half a century of progress in oncology shows us that breakthroughs will come from insights at the molecule level. Like cancer, dementia is many diseases, and multiple treatments will be needed. Progress will be made in small, incremental advances, gathering a momentum so that disease groups become amenable to treatment cure over time. And I think these serve as useful lessons. And one of my big philosophies is copy, copy, copy. And we've just done a report at the moment through an organisation called RAND in the UK, where we've looked at different diseases and what their impacts were. So what happens around the drug discovery, what happens around media and society. So if you take HIV and AIDS, when a number of high-profile politicians and celebrities got HIV and AIDS, it raised the profile. It changed the whole issue of HIV and AIDS. And I think we need to learn from those and copy where we can. Whilst this complex work on a cure continues, there are reasons for optimism, particularly for those of us in middle age concerned about chances of developing dementia. And I really like this phrase, what is good for your heart is good for your brain. There is evidence that you can significantly reduce your risk by making simple changes to your lifestyle. Diabetes, midlife obesity, and midlife hypertension each show evidence that the risk of dementia is increased. In the UK, we've been developing, as part of the health checks for 50 onwards, where people have a health check once a year, and they go in and they are given advice and information around what is good for your heart is good for your brain. So chronic heart disease, strokes, all can, if you're managing those kind of chronic conditions, can reduce the impact of you receiving dementia or getting dementia. And I don't think a lot of people are aware of that. I don't think people are aware that actually you can reduce the opportunity of getting dementia. But there are still those that question the evidence for some of these risks advice. But I think it's common sense. You know, I like to run, I like to keep healthy. I have a couple of glasses of fizz every now and again, but I don't think that harms. You know, I think we should all try and keep healthy. Christine, I think you are talking about what you do to keep healthy. I met Mike yesterday, who's got, again, early onset dementia, and he plays golf. And he was telling us a great story that he can't remember to actually to write down his scores, and they won't allow him to cheat. None of his friends will allow him to cheat, so somebody has to take his scores down for him. And he was just saying how great it is that he can still come out. He has friends that take him out, so he can still play his golf, still be part of society, still be with his friends, and also keep healthy. And I think that's really important. I think this is an area where you in Australia are setting the bar. When Dennis and I came in November, we were really impressed with what Australia are doing around reducing risk factors like healthier living. And I was made aware of the Brainy app. Is anybody aware of the Brainy app that was released from the Alzheimer Society? So this is something that you can go in to, and it gives you a quick assessment on your lifestyle, behaviour and medical condition, and then find out what you can do to lessen these risks. If you do one thing today, I would really recommend that you go on to that. So, if we're to beat dementia, we must also work globally with nations, businesses and scientists from all over the world, working together as we did with cancer and with HIV and AIDS. And that was a quote from David Cameron. So December 2013 was a seminal moment when the UK used its presidency of the G8, which is now the G7, to identify and agree a new international approach on dementia research in recognition that the condition is fast becoming the biggest pressure on healthcare systems around the world. It brought together health and science ministers from all of the G7 countries and international experts. And I remember going there that first morning with Professor Alistair Burns. There was nobody around. There was a massive function room. There was over 1,000 people there. And he and I were just sat there. And again, it was one of our firsts. And we were just saying, isn't this amazing? So we wrote the first dementia strategy in 2009. And in 2013, here we were set with about to watch world leaders talking about dementia for the first time ever. And that made me proud to have been part of that journey. The challenge was and remains great, but countries and organisations across the world have shown that in a short space of time, big steps can be taken, momentum on a global scale can be created, with leadership, commitment and collaboration. More still needs to be done, and we should not be complacent, but we should be proud of what we've achieved. Personally, I've been proud to lead the global work. I've had the opportunity to visit a range of countries, talk to organisations, but for me, most importantly, talk to people with dementia and their carers, because this is where I get my ideas from. This is where they say to you, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Why do you think that makes sense? And that's where we've been able to develop the policies in England. So I just thought I'd give you a quick update in terms of the journey so far. So we had the G8 summit in December 2013, and then we had a range of events around the world. And I was the kind of prodder. I was going around to those countries saying, okay, you've agreed now to do this. You need to deliver on what you said you were going to do. And as a result of that, the UK had a major event on finance and incentives. Canada and France had an event on academia and industry. Japan did prevention and care models, and then the US did an event on research. In February 2014, we appointed Dennis Gill Ayling. Now, Dennis has been an advocate, a true advocate for improving dementia globally. His mum had dementia, and he looked after her for about 14, 15 years. And therefore, you can see the passion in him. So he's not just a businessman. He's not just a billionaire with an aeroplane. You know, he's really dedicated to making a real difference across the world. And as a result of that, recruited about 17 people who are scientists, academics, people with dementia. So Hilary Doxford, I don't know if people have come across Hilary. She has early onset dementia, and she's a member of the World Dementia Council. And I think that's really important, that we have somebody there in the middle of all of these important senior people actually going, hold on a minute, ladies and gentlemen, I don't think that's quite right. And she does it, and she's not scared to do it. And I think because of Hilary, we've made different decisions and different choices. We've also seen 21 countries have national plans, and 8 are in development. And I know that Australia doesn't have its own national plan, and it's not my role as a senior civil servant to say to Australia, you must have one, but I will encourage senior civil servants when I see them on Monday to really try and ensure that you have a national dementia strategy. The reason I say that is if you have something to focus on, if you do 3 or 4 things really well instead of lots of things badly, it makes the difference. You see the difference in society and communities. And the first time I ever saw an ambulance in Yorkshire, which is where I live, and it had a dementia-friendly ambulance sticker on the back of it, I cannot tell you the impact that had on me, because that's in the DNA of my community now. That's not just about me as a civil servant in policy saying to government, you must do. That was out there in the community, and I was so, so proud to see that. We also have just announced the Global Alzheimer's and Dementia Action Lines. This is very similar to the Dementia Action Lines in the UK. The Dementia Action Lines in the UK has 1,000 organisations who work together to support people with dementia, and they take 2 or 3 themes a year. One of the first themes they would do is reduce antipsychotic medication, and we didn't do it through government. We did it through peers. We worked with pharmacists and hospitals, with GPs to GP, and we used them to actually challenge their peers to say, why is it that that person with dementia is still on an antipsychotic drug? They may have needed it in hospital, but they're now under discharge. You need to find other ways of helping to manage that person's condition. It's not right that they're still on an antipsychotic medication. And as a result, we've reduced it by over 70%, which again, I'm really proud of. We had the first ministerial conference on dementia in Geneva in March 2015. Again, another seminal moment for me. So we were in this massive hall in the World Health Organization, and I was sat behind my Secretary of State, and Dennis was sat next to him, Margaret Chan, and all the other senior ministers. And they were there together to say, we want to continue this fight against dementia. And 93 countries signed up to the call for action. And the World Health Organization said that had never, ever happened before on any disease area. And that, again, was a great moment for us to go forward. I just thought I'd show you this kind of collage of pictures, which I think is really interesting. I think the main one for me is your Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, who I understand actually went out and did a swim, and this is not my quote, in his budgie smugglers, for dementia. We've got President Obama, we've got we've got our Prime Minister David Cameron, and then the middle one is when we had the UK Legacy event. And I think what I'm trying to show here is that with political leadership, you can actually make a real difference. And I'm going to talk later in my presentation about the 4 or 5 things I think you need in order to make change. So I'm just going to give you a quick update on what we've been doing in the UK. So I've talked about the figures. So in 2012, our diagnosis rate was 41%. In 2009, we didn't even know what the prevalence was. We had no data. So how do you know if you're making a difference unless you can monitor what you're doing? And I think that's really important. And Carol Bennett said that to me yesterday, that in Australia, you need to make sure that you know what your data is, understand what your prevalence is, so then you can then demonstrate how you need to make those improvements. We've moved from 41% to 62%. There are more people now in the UK receiving a diagnosis than ever before. We've worked with those organisations that weren't as up to speed. And what we've done is we've used the lessons, the experiences from those other organisations and said, copy them. You know, work with the GPs. Think about what you can do to engage people in the community to come forward and get a diagnosis. We've got 105 communities who've signed up to Dementia Friendly. So what does that mean? So we worked with people with dementia who told us they want to find their way around and feel safe in their local community or city. They want to access local facilities they're used to, banks, shops, cafes, cinemas, post offices. And I was talking about a gentleman I've worked with, Trevor Jarvis, in the UK. He's got vascular dementia, and he's a real character. And he and his wife do a lot of speaking. And he, at one point, said, I don't want Anne, that's his wife, spending all my money, now that I can't remember the PIN code. I want to be able to have the independence to use my own bank account. So he approached Lloyds Bank in the UK and said, can you help me? So for him now, he uses his signature. But what Lloyds have done is they've said for anybody with dementia who can't use their account and want a different way to use it, we will help you do that. And that's bespoking it so you can remain independent and continue to, have your own life. People with dementia also told us that they wanted to maintain their social networks that make them still feel part of the community. And I think this is what Christine said to us earlier. We've also got over 1 million dementia friends. Can I ask if anybody's a dementia friend here? So when I was in Japan about 3 years ago, I found dementia friends, and it's called Caravan Mates, and their emblem was 2 donkeys. Don't ask me why. But it doesn't matter, because Dementia Friends is about encouraging society and communities to understand what it feels like to have dementia and to support them in a small way. So I'm a dementia friend. This is my badge. We have these badges. And I'm also a dementia champion, which means I can train others. To become a dementia friend, it takes an hour. That's all. And the things that we talk about within those sessions are, what are the 5 things that you should know about dementia? And I'm going to test you, okay? So what do you think the 5 things you should know? Come on, don't be shy. Yep. So what do you think the 5 things you should know about dementia? So what's yes. Yes. Yep. Exactly. It's caused by disease of the brain. It's not just about losing your memory. It can affect thinking, communicating, doing everyday tasks. It's possible to live well with dementia. And I think that's one of the biggest kind of stigmas and assumptions, that you can't. And there's more to a person than the dementia. So I've brought a couple of these little cards with me. And one of the things I've said to Alzheimer's Australia is, copy it. We pinched it from Japan. Take it. Take all our stuff, take all our information and use it. Japan now has 8 million dementia friends, which I think is incredible and has made a real difference. England are moving towards 3 million. One of the other things that we do within the sessions as a trainer is we use a penny, so an English penny, and we say to people, okay, tell me what's on the front and the back of an English penny. And you see this penny every single day. And the frustration that people have going, oh my God, what's the chain thing under the Queen's head? Does she have a crown on? Is there an actual 1p underneath it? And what we say at the end of that is, how did that make you feel? So you see that thing every single day, but actually you can't remember what's on it. How frustrating must that make you feel? The other thing we do is how many stages to make a cup of tea? There are lots of different stages to making a cup of tea. And does it really matter how you make it? That's the whole point of it. And I think what we do sometimes with people with dementia is we de-skill them because we think that they can't do things for themselves. And actually they can. You just think about different ways of doing it. So if they don't recognise the kettle, label it. If the coffee needs to be in the front, put it down in the front. I think it's about finding ways to help support people live independently and don't take away those skills from them. I do this with my daughter. So she doesn't know how to use the dishwasher. She doesn't know how to use the washing machine. That's my fault, and what I should be doing is skilling her up when she goes to university so that she can actually deal with those things in her life. So I think, why should we be any different to ourselves? We still want to be able to be independent, and why shouldn't we do that? I talked about the Dementia Action Lines and that we did a theme around reducing antipsychotics. We also did dementia-friendly hospitals. Every hospital now in England is dementia-friendly. We've also worked with parliamentarians. Every member of the cabinet is a dementia friend. We have over 200 parliamentarians who are dementia friends. We had an anniversary event with John Bercow in his accommodation in Parliament about 2 months ago. What was really interesting is, obviously downstairs is the old part of the house and upstairs is his accommodation. And there was a bed in this one room. And apparently that's where the old kings and queens used to come before they would go into Parliament. And it was really tiny. And I thought, God, my ancestors must have been midgets because, you know, the bed was tiny. But I suppose what I'm saying is that through working with parliamentarians, with organisations, with communities, with people with dementia and their carers, you can make a real difference. And I've seen that happen in England and in the UK. We've trained over 500,000 NHS staff to do Tier 1 training and over 100,000 social care staff. The biggest thing for me, though, is what we've been doing with schools. I think if you educate children, it will mean by the time they learn about dementia, hopefully the stigma will reduce. They'll be more aware as they're getting older. So my daughter, she's 15 and she understands dementia. She's aware of it. So we've been working with schools, and it's now in the curriculum for about 50% of schools in England. And then the great thing that we've been doing is been working with the Scouts and Brownies, who have their own Dementia Friends badge. And yesterday we saw a Kids for Schools video that Alzheimer's Australia are also about to put out. And it was sad, but it was also uplifting, because actually the children in those videos have got either grandparents and parents with dementia. But what they're saying is that they want to help support them and raise awareness across their friends. And I think that's where we really need to put a lot of effort and attention into. So, copy it all. I'll send Alzheimer's Australia all the stuff we've been doing, all our policies. And I think it is about not thinking that you have to reinvent the wheel. If you do 2 or 3 things really well, you'll start to see the changes soon. So I'm going to kind of go on to some of the areas that experiences I've had when I've been around the world. So I first met Pepper the robot when I was in Japan. And Pepper the robot is about this high, cute as a button, and he's used in care homes, in people's own homes. And it has a TV monitor, so it can play music, it can do stories, and it can also recognise changes in the person with dementia. And when I tweeted, because I'm an advocate tweeter, back to the UK about Pepper the robot, I had such a backlash, because the culture and behaviour in Japan is around innovation and technology. So they don't blink at things like this. But in the UK, it was different. And I wasn't advocating that we should take over human care. What I was saying is that as we're waiting for the cure tomorrow, we need to think about different care today. We need to think about innovations in technology, because actually we need to think about the 47 million people that have got dementia today. So, you know, I think innovation in technology is good. One of the things we've been doing in the UK is looking at social science and how we can use things like singing for the brain, music. How many of us listen to a song on the radio and it can transport you back to when you were 18? And I had, you know, hair up to here, back combed, lacquer all over it, listening to Duran Duran and Spandau Ballet. That promotes me straight back to it. When I've been in care homes and residential care homes, you know, they've moved from Vera Lynn. They're now up to Rod Stewart. I think when I'm in a care home, potentially it'll be either Miley Cyrus or, you know, Taylor Swift. But what I'm saying is that they use music to engage people. The care home I went to last week, it was a lady's 100th birthday, and it was fantastic. And she was still bright as a button. And they had the DJ and they had all the 50s and 60s music, and everybody was up dancing. There was also a gentleman in there who had just come from his own home, and he'd gone most nights to the pub, the local pub. And what was really great was the home allowed him to still do that. So they put him in a taxi, they let him go to the pub with his friends, and he got a taxi back. And I think that's showing him dignity and respect and saying, we still want you to leave your life, but you're safe. We're ensuring that you're in a safe place. The other thing that I experienced when I was here in November was the virtual dementia experience, which came from Alzheimer's Australia, and it's won a recent award. And what was amazing about this was it shows you what it feels like to have dementia. So it's a simulation. So you go into a house, and it kind of the person with dementia is either moving away from things or is becoming agitated, and you don't know why. You're thinking, why? What's happening? What's happening? And then the next simulation, they show you why. So Christine was talking about, you know, the things on the floor. So I didn't understand that a mat for a person with dementia could be look like a hole in the ground. So therefore, that person was walking into this house, and all they could see was a big hole. And they were going, oh, don't, you know, and the carer was going, what's wrong? What's your problem? And what we're not understanding is what the difference this makes to people with dementia. And if you can understand why they become agitated or why they become, their behaviour changes, you can make those simple changes to them so that they're not. Okay, I really wanted to show you a video that we've made in England. And we had permission from Paul McCartney to use his song. And whenever I see this, so this went out prime time, Coronation Street, prime time. And we've done a couple of other videos, but for me this brings home what I mean about society and dementia friends.
Hi, I'm Gina, and I've been diagnosed with early stage dementia, and I'd like to sing you a song. What would you think if I sang out of tune? Would you stand up and walk out on me? Lend me your ears and I'll sing you a song, and I'll try not to sing out of key. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. I get high with a little help from my friends. I'm gonna try with a little help from my friends. What do I do when my love is away?
Does it worry you to be alone?
How do I feel by the end of the day?
Are you sad because you're on your own?
No, I get by with a little help from my friends. I get high with a little help from my friends. I'm gonna try with a little help from my friends.
Do you need anybody?
I need somebody to love.
Could it be anybody?
I want somebody to love. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. I'm gonna try with a little help from my friends. Oh, I get high with a little help from my friends. Yes, I get by with a little help from my friends. A little help from my friends. 1 in 3 of us over 65 will get dementia. There's no cure yet. So to become a dementia friend and find little ways you can help people like me, please go to dementiafriends.org.uk now. Thank you.
So Gina in that video has dementia, and I think that was really important. And when we did our first ever video, we did it with people with dementia, and the strapline was, I have dementia, I still have a life. And I think that's what changes societies. You need a movement. You need things that create that kind of awareness, that reduce stigma and change behaviours. And it's the small things. I'm not saying that that's, you know, changed everybody's behaviours and reduced the stigma, but it does make the difference. So I've talked a little bit about Australia, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about how we need to go further and faster. And I did have a video of the Bionic Man. Now, I understand in Australia the Bionic Man was quite popular, but it's more about saying we need to go further and faster. And I'm not going to play it because I've decided against it. But it's the video where he has the crash and they build him and they can get, and he goes, and I can go further and faster. And I just wanted to kind of keep that in your head. So dementia does not recognise national boundaries. Status, wealth, neither will solutions. No one country, organisation or sector can solve dementia on its own. Lessons from other global diseases, such as HIV, cancer, heart disease, demonstrate that breakthroughs in treatment and cure came from global collaborations. Through a commitment to tackling the science, an active and committed advocacy community, a flexible and responsive regulatory environment, a coordinated strategic response and collaboration across sectors. The G8 Dementia Summit in 2013 and the first ministerial conference on dementia prioritised global action against dementia. We now need to move from G7 to global, because I've talked about the low to middle income developing countries. And there's a danger that if we don't, we'll fall over the cliff edge unless momentum is maintained. So I've been working with the World Dementia Council and with the G7 and beyond to ensure that we don't fall off that cliff edge. So I think we are on the right trajectory, but there's still way to go. So in terms of increasing costs, urgent need to address budgets, failing to keep up with the projected compound increases in care costs globally, the price of breakthroughs, improving care. I've talked a lot about we need a balance of research, but we also need to invest in care so we can support people who've currently got dementia. We need open science. We need to share the data. A lot of scientists don't share their failed attrition, their failed research. And actually, what has shown through other breakthroughs is somebody else's failure is somebody else's success. We need to think about stigma and rights, low to middle income developing countries, Europe in particular, increasing global awareness of dementia and reach beyond the G7. And we need to build up dementia-friendly communities and dementia friends campaigns. So I spoke a little bit about what makes a difference. How do you change things? How do you make sure that you get that traction in the DNA of a community? So I like this cartoon. No matter how much we might want it to change, change doesn't happen, and I don't believe in magic. So change in big organisations is difficult, and there's no guarantee of success, but we can learn from both our successes and our mistakes. So my experience has shown me that you need 5 things to be in place in order to deliver sustainable change. The first one is political endorsement. Without it, or if it's half-hearted, you'll be sidelined sooner or later. The value of a committed, passionate political leader from the front and promoting the change is immeasurable and creates energy, buy-in and advocacy. And Cameron is a real example of that. The personal involvement of David Cameron has significantly raised the profile both domestically and internationally and has encouraged other leaders to identify dementia as a priority and resulted in additional funding. The second thing you need is performance management. Without it, translating political and organisational ambition, irrespective of the energy behind it, into action, the front line will prove difficult, no matter the amount of intellectual or clinical buy-in. Unless you're going to baseline and then measure, there'll be many opportunities to do nothing. You do what you measure. And we've been working on a range of indicators and metrics within the UK, which demonstrate how we've improved around health and care, on funding, on dementia friends, on dementia-friendly communities, on diagnosis rates. And my Secretary of State at the moment is obsessed with metrics, and therefore is always challenging us to go further and faster. We're also working with the OECD around international benchmarks that countries can start comparing themselves. And I think it's only when you have that and then you can challenge leaders to say, why isn't our country operating, behaving like England or like Australia? Third, you need organisational priority. Change must be a priority for every organisation, top to bottom, national and local, clinical and operational. If it isn't, it'll become very clear very quickly, and when the going gets tough, people and organisations will pull in different directions. For example, in the Netherlands, their Delta plan has brought together departments of health and social services and respective frontline services, researchers, academics and charities, all helping to deliver the plan. You also need funding. Things don't happen without funding. It's critical and it's symbolic. So we've had a lot of investment in the Prime Minister's Challenge. And that's allowed us to do a lot of things, both nationally and locally. The other thing that's really important is media engagement. I've just shown you a video. It went viral across England. It changed behaviours. It reduced the stigma. And I think media can play a really important part in doing that. And this is why you need to get them behind you and create a movement. I'm going to leave you with one final thought. There are so many people out there who will tell you that you can't. What you've got to do is turn around and say, watch me. And I think dementia isn't contagious, but hope is. Thank you very much. Q&A? Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I just wondered whether we've got that Dementia Friends program here in Australia that you were talking about in the UK. Not yet. Not yet.
Yes. So I know Carol Bennett, who's the chief exec, is really interested. And what I've said to her is, I'm happy to put her in touch with. So we work very closely with the Alzheimer Society in England, and we fund them to do it. So we fund part government, part them.
Can I ask how much money do you fund that program to, the tune of?
So in the first year, I think it was about $1 million, and they match fund it as well. So it's not expensive. And actually what you're doing is you're creating a social movement. So it's actually volunteers. They run it, you know, so it's not expensive. And once you train people, they can go out. And one of the things that they do in Dementia Friends, once you've done it, they say, well, do one thing now. And I live in a really small village in Yorkshire called Burley and Wharfdale, and there's lots of little shops. And my action was I went down and helped train some of the shops, especially in the post office, because there's a lot of people with dementia go down to the post office. It's a hub, it's a community. And that's what they say, take that one thing and do something different with it.
So can I just ask a little bit about the training? How long does that take?
Yeah.
And what do you cover?
Yeah. So to be a dementia friend, it takes an hour, and you can now do it online. So we've progressed, because actually not everybody has an hour in the middle of the day, so you can go online and do it. I'd recommend you go into Alzheimer Society to have a look. And what we do is, I'm happy to share this as well. So we talk about the 5 things you need to remember. We then do a number of kind of exercises. We do the penny coin. We do making a cup of tea. We also do a scenario where we have everybody in a line and we say we're going to give you a character. And we're going to ask you questions about this character. And if you think that character can do it, move forward. And if you don't, stand still. And we ask things like, do you think your character can hold down a job? Do you think they can still exercise? Do you still think that they can have a sexual relationship? Do you still think that they can use money? And at the end of it, everybody was in different places. And then we told them that every single person had the same character. And that shows, I think, people's behaviours and assumptions. It was a 75-year-old lady with dementia. So it's things like that. So it's the R moment, isn't it? Where you're all stood there going, why is it everybody feels different? And what do we need to do to change those assumptions and behaviours? So it takes an hour, and then you get your badge. And then for a champion, it's a day. So I helped train the World Dementia Envoy and his team in Quintiles in London. We've also trained all the UK Department of Health civil servants. So this is in Whitehall, and our permanent secretary has now got dementia friends across Whitehall. So it's also in other government departments. So Department for Work and Pensions, they're on the front line. They deal with people with pensions. They deal with older people. So again, it's about ensuring that communities have a basic understanding of what it needs. It's not about being clinical, but it's about having the respect and understanding. So that if somebody comes up to you, or if you want to help support somebody, if they want that support, you can do it.
Can I just say, I came across the Dementia Friends initiative. I think it's wonderful. Yeah, I just thought it was great. So I communicated directly with the UK about it because we were looking at adapting, trying to develop something like that locally because they're just some really great ideas. I was able to sign up as a Dementia Friend, but I wasn't able to access any of the webinars, training, resources. And I was told that there's collaboration nationally, and that's where the organisation sees the exchange, if you like, and the sharing of ideas and resources. Having said that, one of the, I think it was a regional management person, sent me some examples of some of the activities that you're talking about, and they could be used as long as they were fully acknowledged. But I just think here at the moment in Australia, at the local level, there's opportunities to be doing stuff.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit hampered by not being able to, as you say, copy. That the whole sort of acknowledgement copyright thing can become a bit of an obstacle.
It's not at the moment. So Canada, UK, Scotland, Ireland, France, Germany, you know, they're all using it. And I'd be more than happy. I mean, I'm seeing Carol again on Monday. I know that they want to start doing this. And I think I've already said to her that I'm happy to put her in contact with Jeremy Hughes, who's the chief exec of the Alzheimer Society in the UK. I've already tweeted him to say people are really interested in the Dementia Friends movement and anything I can do to help support that so that it's less expensive. So if you have all the resources, it's less expensive. It needs a bit of seed funding in order to start training people. You know, you can even use the campaigns that we've been using. So that video was there to promote the Dementia Friends.
Yes, and I actually thought about using that, and we're looking at trying to attract some funding to do something initially locally, to engage with people and sort of help them, I mean, encourage them to help shape it as well, rather than just transplant it as it is.
I agree.
So
Bespoke
I'd like
as
to
well.
talk to you more about that later.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Jill. That was fantastic. A question around some of the statistics you mentioned on your fantastic successes in reducing the amount of people on antipsychotics in the UK. I'm really interested to find out how you went about doing that, how you measure that, and the difference that it's made in terms of outcomes.
Yeah. So we did struggle for some time in getting the data out of GP practices. But what we were lucky in that we had a great leader in Professor Alistair Burns, who's well renowned in England. And we used his leadership and his influence, and also the BMA, the Royal College of Nursing. So we used the big advocate organisations to ensure that we had up-to-date data on antipsychotic medication, because that's important. It's performance management. If you know what you're dealing with, you can then baseline it and measure it and see where you're improving. And then, as I said, we had this, it was called a call for action with the Dementia Action Alliance. And this isn't about government. So, you know, I'm a member. So UK government is a member of the Dementia Action Alliance, and we pay 50k a year. And we sign up to certain things that we will do. But then so do 1,000 other organisations. So what we did was we said, let's have antipsychotics as our theme for the year. And then we worked out a plan. So we tried to identify where the variances and where the high impacts were. So that was in hospital. So when people are in hospital, they were being prescribed antipsychotic medication because they were distressed. They were out of their normal, they were out of their homes. One of the big things that we do in hospitals in England is called the Butterfly Campaign. I don't know if anybody's heard of that. But this is where you have a butterfly sticker above a person with dementia's bed. So that brings to the attention of those nurses and those support staff that that person has dementia. And also we have different crockery for people with dementia, because actually they sometimes forget to eat or forget to drink and therefore become dehydrated, and therefore that creates problems. So therefore the staff are aware that they have to check that that individual has eaten and that they've been drinking as well. The other thing that we've now done is that we now allow all carers to stay in hospital with their loved ones when they're in hospital with dementia. So we allow mothers and children to be in hospital together. Why wouldn't we do that for people with dementia? And I think that's fantastic. The other thing we did was we've invested, and I'm slightly moving away, Victoria, but we also invested in the healing environment. And you cannot underestimate the environment, the impact the environment has on people with dementia. So, for example, a hospital I went to recently in Manchester, they've built their own garden. So people with dementia can go outside and sit in a nice, peaceful atmosphere. And there's also a memory room. So there's books, there's pictures, that they can sit in a quiet atmosphere. They've also changed the colours of the walls so that they, because it's just bland, so they don't know where they're going, they don't know where they are, so they might walk to the nurse's station and then not find their way back. But actually they've coloured the walls so people with dementia know where they're going. So it's all things like that we've been doing. But in terms of antipsychotics, we then worked with the biggest consumption where we knew, so in hospitals. And then we got a red flag. So when the person was diagnosed, was referred back into the community, their GP knew that they were on an antipsychotic medication because a red flag came up. And they then had the discussion with the person with dementia and their carer and said, I think we need to think about getting you off this drug and think about different ways of managing your behaviour. And that saw the decrease. For those GPs that were a bit more stubborn, we just sent in the other GPs. We had sessions, we had loads of sessions around the country where we invited nurses, healthcare professionals, pharmacists, and had their peers stood up here saying, this isn't right, you shouldn't be prescribing, some it's appropriate but it's not for all. You need to think about different ways of managing people's behaviour and understanding why they're agitated instead of just having the chemical cosh. We also worked a lot with residential care homes in the middle of the night, somebody getting up, distressed, you know, and we're out wandering around the home. Immediately call the GP and GP gives them an antipsychotic medication. That's just not appropriate. So we worked really hard with the residential care home managers, and we've done things like, so there was a gentleman who used to work in a prison and kept going around all the doors trying to unlock them because he was used to locking up. And because he couldn't open certain doors, he was getting agitated. And by understanding that individual's history, their life story, knowing what their job was, knowing what they liked and disliked, they got to know him. And they made this block of wood and they just put locks in it so he could every morning and every night just go and unlock them. Just tiny little things that you can do that reduce the behaviour, that stop the agitation, which means you don't have to have a chemical cosh for that individual. And it doesn't have to be expensive. A care home I went to recently, they saw this lady kind of wandering up and down. I don't want to call it wandering because it's just walking up and down. She would just walk up, walk back down, walk up, walk back down, because that's what she wanted to do. So what they did was they put a chair at the end with some books, and this lady liked scarves and jewellery, and she just used to sit down and then, you know, look out the window, read some books or two. And what it did was it meant that she was able to enjoy what she was doing, because all she was doing was just walking up and down, and she was becoming agitated because she didn't know where she was going. So they just put these places in where they could sit down and relax and have things that they enjoyed. The other thing that they had in this care home was the garden. The garden was beautiful, and it was people with dementia that did the garden. And I've got pictures on, I mean, I'm happy to tweet them afterwards. Beautiful. And the pergolas, they would sit underneath them and just sit and watch the world go by. I love doing that in my garden. So why should it be different for anybody else with dementia? So what I'm saying is that we worked with professionals. We worked with those individuals who were prescribing and then used their peers to challenge them. And that's where we saw the difference. And it was amazing. We've got one now on carers, and as I said, we did the dementia-friendly hospitals. Every hospital in England is now dementia-friendly as a result. And you just do 2 or 3 things really well and focus in on it. You can speak to me afterwards if you don't want to put your hand up. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Gill, and thank you, Christine, for being so inspiring in your presentations today. What a fitting start to Dementia Awareness Month for us, and a big thank you to all of you for taking the time to join us in the fight against dementia. Last but not least, we have some raffle tickets on sale today. They're only $5 each, and a wonderful quilt that has been donated to us to raise our funds for our younger onset dementia program. John Quinn and his wife Glenys Petrie, who are from our Remember Me Younger Onset group and are well known to many of you here today, are about to set off on to the Camino de Santiago 825-kilometre walk across Spain to raise funds and awareness for our younger onset dementia program. So dig deep, it's a great cause. So thank you everyone. A light lunch is going to be served outside the room, where Christine will also be available to sell and sign her books and personally give you your own copy. Thank you very much.